social worker with a master's in social work from New York University. After finishing her degree, she went on to complete her clinical training at Metropolitan Institute of Psychoanalytic Psychotherapy. During this intensive 3-year training, she gained the expertise to work with patients in psychoanalysis, which allows us to understand the unconscious process. She is the owner of Therapy Story in Bloomfield, New Jersey, and very passionate about increasing mental health access for underserved communities. We've partnered on a lot of programming for AAPIs and are really happy to be partnering with her again on this program. So thank you so much for joining, and I will turn it over to Smita.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Amber, as always, for having me back here today. I agree, the topic today and the line itself, right? Good Asian, bad Asian, just talking about how much that spoke to a lot of people who showed up today to be here with us. And I think it's such an important topic that we're going to jump into. I'm going to do a quick intro again on myself. Welcome to today's Lunch and Learn. Reminder that it's a lunch and learn, so I hope you take this moment to pause and take a bite for yourself while you're here with us learning. I'm Sweta Consagra, a licensed clinical social worker. I work primarily with individuals and couples and families and communities navigating our mental health through the lens of cultural identity, intergenerational expectations, and systemic stressors. I'm really excited to explore this important topic with everyone here today. I want to remind everyone as we're here, this is going to be a safe space to explore and challenge the myths that have shaped how we see ourselves and how others see us. I'm going to encourage openness, curiosity, and compassion for yourself and others as we move through today's content. Throughout today's presentation, you'll notice there are going to be 2 interactive exercises. One of those exercises we are going to break out into smaller breakout rooms for some conversation today. And I encourage you to keep your own experiences present, and if comfortable, allow yourself to share those experiences. When we do share with each other, we allow for connectivity in our community and a reminder that you're not alone in what you may have seen or felt as a member of our AAPI community. There will be an opportunity to share out loud or through our chat box based on your own comfort level. And again, those small breakout rooms will be another opportunity for you to really find a place to identify with others. We're going to jump into the objectives. We try to do a lot in a short amount of time because we know that you're coming and really coming to learn and understand some of the experiences that you may be having or those around you are having. So our objectives today are going to be threefold. We're going to first try to understand what that model minority myth is. You may have heard that language before and where it came from. To do that, we're going to actually explore the historical lens of the myth's creation, which is going to be provided in our discussion. Second, we're going to look at how it influences our mental health and our sense of identity. And finally, to explore the tools we can use to navigate, to heal from its impact. I know anytime we come into a space to learn, we're always coming in with a hope to find something to leave with. So we absolutely will be ensuring that you have some tools and some thoughts on things you can do and will be able to do in your community after today's Lunch and Learn. And of course, we'll always share a list of resources for you. This is a recorded Lunch and Learn that you will also have access to later. So if there's something you didn't catch today or you say, I really need to go back to that, just a reminder, it'll always be here for you. We're going to jump into our icebreaker this morning. So I want to just start by naming the messages we've internalized. What's one stereotype? And a reminder that stereotypes can be posed as positive or negative that you've heard about the AAPI community. I want you to feel free to speak it aloud or type it in the chat. This activity is a reminder of how pervasive narratives can be, even when they seem complementary to who we are. So I'm curious, just before I jump into this model minority and the idea of the good Asian and bad Asian, what it really means to be considered a member of the AAPI community and how others may have spoken about you or what you may have heard about yourself. This could be both in your upbringing or even here now as an adult and what you're experiencing. I'm curious if anybody's able to jump in and share what their experiences have been. I already see something coming in our chat box. Asians are good in STEM subjects. I really appreciate that being popped right in there. I'll acknowledge as a therapist, we do not claim that math is our subject that we are best at. I remember being in a high school class and somebody trying to copy off of me. And I said, I encourage you not to do that. And they said, well, you're Indian. You should be really good at math. And so there's already this awareness that people throw things at you just assuming based on how you look. I'm going to look at all of the ones that are coming in because I think there's so many good ones right now. So we have one stereotype. Asians won't speak up and like to keep the peace. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that. Asians are law abiding and hardworking. Absolutely. Those are all things that we tend to hear. Unassuming, low key presence. Absolutely. So already, I mean, if we look at our Asian American community, how there's just so many assumptions being made about you just based on the community that you come from, the way that in which you look, and the assumptions about who you're going to be, and how that's going to start to influence you and what you believe you should be doing based on what the community around you is doing. And these messages, just to really, as I mentioned a high school story, they start very early on. They're often influenced by how your parents may have shown up in the community, what your parents were encouraged to do or not do, what they were told. So you can really think of who were immigrants in the community and really encouraged to, and actually even celebrated for being able to be passive, for not being problematic, and how that was often given a lot of praise. And so if that's what was occurring, that was then what was probably the messaging you were receiving at home is here's a way to be able to be quote unquote successful in the community you live in. Just don't have anything that's problematic for yourself. Don't find anything to point out. And then you'll be able to kind of move through society without being a problem. This also leads to what we're going to talk about, which is that model minority myth in a moment. So these questions, and I hope everybody's thinking about it for themselves and able to consider some examples for themselves that you might want to share a little bit more in the breakout room, is really something that you want to be able to think, how early on did I internalize these messages? Who around me was really joining in to the messaging we received about ourselves? And how has it impacted me even in the here and now? And how is it showing up in my world here and now? And thank you for the examples that popped into the chat box. So I'm going to jump in to some of the discussions about understanding the key characteristics of the model minority myth. These are traits that are often most associated with it. They paint a picture of a hardworking, perfection, somebody who's really focused on perfection, being hardworking, quiet, and successful members of our community. But they do not allow for any room for struggle, difference, or authenticity in who you are. As a result, many members in the community can feel a sense of obligation or expectation to perform at a certain caliber, or even influence to create a professional career in only a few small areas that are deemed to be respectable in the community. And so that translates into I do not have a box I'm allowed to move out of because then I'm moving out of the model minority that I am associated with, and I'm no longer going to be able to be a part of the community that I am so strongly a part of, but I'm feeling different then. And so these key characteristics that are placed upon the AAPI community are placed upon very early on. I'm going to jump into really understanding, and I think this is one of the really important but also tough parts of our history to really navigate is to understand the model minority, you really have to understand the history and the lens of it and where it came from. So, to understand the model minority, we must navigate the historical lens of the myth's creation and the expectations the community started to have imposed that were politically driven. That term model minority came into popular use in the 1960s during the civil rights movement. As Black Americans were demanding justice and protesting systemic inequality, the media started promoting stories of successful Asian Americans as a counter narrative. There was a 1966 New York Times article that describe Japanese Americans as quietly excelling through hard work and discipline without challenging any authority. That story and others like it were used to contrast AAPI communities with Black Americans, saying in effect, look at them, they're succeeding, why aren't you? This was a political tool, one that was weaponized and success both erased the diversity of our AAPI communities and the racism that they faced. If we really look at the historical lens of being a part of the AAPI community, we also know that often there isn't awareness that there's so much diversity within the community itself and that there's so much to understand about the community itself because the AAPI community was just bulked into one box and no one really paused to understand what that actually looked like. It drove a wedge between communities of color and fed the myth that if you work hard enough, you'll succeed, ignoring systemic barriers entirely. So what that really looks like is we started to create a hierarchy a long time ago. Even though we are all in here as a part of the AAPI community, we identify as a person of color, we would say, but wait a second, I was able to succeed through it. I was able to get through a lot of the things that others and my peers were not. So it must have been that I was just working hard enough. What we didn't actually acknowledge is that we were already put in a box expecting to be that good Asian, right? That Asian who was going to put their head down. They weren't going to be problematic at work. If somebody was asking you to work extra hours, help with homework after school, can you help your classmate? You were always expected to say yes. And because you said yes, you were told how good of a person you were for it. But what that really meant is you fell in the box of a good Asian. Because if you were someone who wanted to say no, if you were someone who wanted to say, I don't have time to do that, I'm not able to support you with that, that's not something I want to do right now, you became problematic. And when you became problematic, you were associated with communities of color that were also associated as problematic. This is where our macro level and micro level systems really start to work together, right? What we would see on the macro level is communities that were often told they were problematic, they were unsafe. This is where we're talking about the contrast between the AAPI communities and Black Americans and what was being said in the 1960s. It drove a wedge between communities of color and fed that myth over and over again. And we really have to remember that as we're sitting here today, identifying as a model minority and saying on one end, we were really pushed to be assume that we could succeed and we were told to do it through all these parts of ourselves that we had to quiet. But at another end, as we look to wake these part of ourselves up, we're really finding the challenge that now we no longer may be able to get the praise and we may be associated with someone who's not as agreeable, not as easy to navigate in the workplace with or in a school setting with. And that's not something we're accustomed to hearing about ourselves. It's not something that those who may have raised us, those generations that came before us are accustomed to hearing about us. And therefore, you may over and over be encouraged to join in to what was really systematically created in the 1960s. I know right now we're all having discussions about how we're getting impacted on those macro levels of, what occurs politically and how it trickles down. And this is really messaging we're all trying to allow ourselves to listen to and hear and understand how it shows up in our daily lives and how the history of it really has been living with us for so long and how it's impacted our mental health. So I'm going to jump into something really important, but I don't want to lose how important it is to understand the history of the model minority. And I would be curious, and you're welcome to throw it into the chat box if this is something that you were aware of already, if this is something that feels newer to you today to talk about, and just understanding how we got to where we did today. There's also that other lens of having a lot of your family members immigrate here earlier on and really hoping for the opportunity for something better for they would raise their children, opportunities that they didn't feel like they had back home. But that there was a lot of focus on what does it look like to survive here? What does it look like to just be able to make it and understand a new system, a new language, a new place? And there was not a lot of focus on how am I feeling? How is this impacting me? And so a lot of what the world they lived in is what started to create how that your household internally would look. There probably were not a lot of discussions about what it felt like to have to be quiet at work, to have to be praised for those things, to have to be the person that would always push a little bit more than the others. And how often we, again, talk about our community being so successful. What we're ignoring is, well, to gain that success, what did we have to give up along the way? So, this is where the impact on mental health is going to come in. Mental health consequences can show up in so many ways. First, the internalized pressure to never fail. Many of us were told that anything less than perfect wasn't acceptable. Anything less than perfect. If you got an A, why didn't you get an A plus? If there was the ability to get extra credit, why didn't you do it? If there was a club after school that you could join, why didn't you join that one and three others with it? It was always assumed that if there was more available, you would be doing more. And when you did not, you felt like you were behind. That's the messaging I often get as a therapist in the room with any of my AAPI clients. I never feel like I'm doing enough because I was never actually told that I did enough. And even when I was striving for the top, I was something higher than that. And so it's always been hard to really figure out internally what is enough for me. What does it look like? What does it feel like? And because we didn't understand that, and anything less than perfect was the goal, you have always felt like what I am doing over time just still does not feel acceptable unless you were able to start navigating that language within yourself. Second, our struggles are invisible. Teachers, employers, even family may dismiss our stress because we're seen as resilient or high achieving. That word resilient is something that is often spoken around us, right? You are able to keep going. Resiliency is praised. When things that are hard happen, you allow yourself to move through it as though it did not happen. And if you talk about it, it's speaking against your strength. To be high achieving was something that others thought of as being on top. The families that were able to have high achieving children, high achieving parents, you often saw those families as the ones whose children were able to engage in several activities, perform high at school, ensure that they spent time with peers who were doing the same, and parents who were able to continue to excel in the workplace. And that was something that everybody deemed as really reaching what perfection can look like in the community. What wasn't spoken about is, what did it feel like to have to be that child? What did it feel like to have to be that parent who was always trying to keep up with what perfection was going to feel like? And it's a hard, hard place to continue to follow through on. I'm going to bring in an example on this that recently came to me from another parent close to me who had a close friend and said, we really need support with this mother. She's trying to support her daughter who's no longer able to keep up with the grades that she had. She's really finding herself challenged in trying to support her daughter as her grades are slipping. She goes to one of the top private schools in our area. It's one of the hardest ones to get to. And her mother does not know what to do now that her grades are slipping. The one thing her mother knows how to do is reinforce the importance of good grades. The one thing her mother knew how to do was to say, if I can support you getting into the best school, if I can support ensuring there's a meal on the table, there's a ride to your next activity, and everything you're going to need to do those assignments is available to you, then my assumption is that you should be able to move through whatever else you have going on. What she didn't consider is her daughter's in middle school, and middle school is hard. And she had some struggles with some of her peers, and some of those struggles caused her to feel really down. Her mental health started to decline. And her mother began to continue to focus on the fact that she was given all of the resources possible to achieve at this school, not recognizing that there was this whole other part of her daughter that she was unable to pay attention to. Because the perfection, the resiliency, and the high achieving parts of her were the only parts her mother knew how to identify with. And it's not because she didn't want to reach her daughter. It's because she wasn't given the tools within herself to learn how to reach her daughter. And therefore, there became a whole part of her she was unable to see. And that resiliency no longer was able to show up in the way it had in the past. And it became really scary for her mother to have to really navigate what this was going to look like. And this is where we're really bringing in right now that there are so many impacts on mental health when you try to keep that bar of perfection. And they often catch up to community members at different times. This young woman is identifying that she's having challenges at the ages of 12 or 13. In the therapy room, we find that a lot of our clientele are saying this at 35, 40, 45, 50, that I no longer am able to really subscribe to the model minority that I was told I needed to be a part of, that I was told was something that I'm fortunate to be a part of because I'm succeeding. I am truly the picture of success. If I have the job and I have the family and I have the finances, I should be able to see myself as someone who was able to succeed here. And yet internally, what I'm feeling is deeply disconnected with myself. And I don't know how to go back and find the parts of myself that I didn't get to connect with early on. Those are huge impacts on our mental health over time. So, as a result, when we talk about this young woman and anyone else in our community, getting that praise for our ability to be resilient and high achieving will continue to reinforce the need to be dismissive of our experiences. To really understand that dismissiveness, that can sound like, it was really hard today to go to work and I'm really exhausted. And, I really wish that I could just put my feet up. But you know what? There's so many people in the world who don't have food on their table. There's so many people in the world who are unable to have the lifestyle that we have. So what I have isn't that bad. I'm going to focus on what others don't have to remind myself that. And so, in the same moment that you go to allow yourself to feel what you feel, the end of the sentence dismisses what you needed. That dismissiveness, when it happens over and over and over again, just repeats the cycle that says what you need isn't as important. Your resiliency, your high achieving, that is the most important part of you. There's also the intergenerational conflict, especially for children of immigrants. Many of us carry cultural values from home that don't always align with society expects. This may look like prioritizing the needs of the collective prior to learning how to pursue experiences from the individualistic framework. That inability to prioritize yourself can lead to decrease in self advocacy or awareness of self when that advocacy may be necessary. And so when we're part of something that is going on and we recognize it's difficult, we do not have the tools to actually navigate what it looks like to use your voice because that was not modeled for you. It was not encouraged for you. And it was considered problematic if you became someone who needed to use their voice. And we have to add in extra layers of fear. What does it mean if I allow myself to be seen? What might happen in my job if I'm someone who starts to speak up? Am I going to be passed up for promotions? Am I going to be told that I'm no longer the best fit for this job if I start to have my own needs in the workplace? And that fear can also lead to then an unconscious desire to stop doing anything and to just continue perpetuating the cycle that you learned early on. And finally, silencing and shame keep us from seeking help. Talking about mental health can feel like betraying your family or being ungrateful. Additionally, it can be seen as a luxury to have time to share what is hard, criticized, or judged when speaking about other communities who may seek support, causing for more shame for needing help. There can be an internalized voice that says, I am not strong enough to manage the stressors that I face while my peers and community members, they absolutely can. And it starts to cause a negative self view that doesn't allow for you to seek support or permission to ask for help. It's a reminder that when the collective, and the collective is us showing up here today, showing up on this webinar, showing up for this information is allowing you to know that you're going to be able to bring this back into your communities. You're going to create conversations around why it was hard to ask for help and why it's encouraged to start asking for help, because this is how we break cycles and this is how we change our intergenerational conflicts that have occurred. It will be uncomfortable and it will be hard, but it will absolutely start to change the voice that was placed upon us very early on that we did not choose for ourselves. So it's a reminder that when the collective seeks support, there's also a normalizing of support, which allows the cycle to change. My hope in everything that I've already said, and we're going to continue conversation around these things, but I've thrown a lot at you already, is that we take 5 to 7 minutes and that we jump into small groups and we start to really think about the impact on each one of you that you have felt. We're going to have the discussion in the small groups to ask you, have you ever felt the weight of the model minority myth? Where did it show up for you? Was it school, work, with your family? And if you're comfortable, after we take that 5 to 7 minutes in these small groups, I'd love to hear some reflections about what you may have been feeling as you've been listening today and how it's impacted you to consider yourself as a good Asian or a bad Asian and what that's meant for you thus far. Shari, I believe you're going to help support us jumping into those small groups.
Yes, I'm going to open them up now.
Thank you.
I'm gonna pause recording.
Thank you. So just jumping back in, the first thing I want to say is we didn't have long enough. And if your discussions were cut short, we're going to invite in a couple minutes here to continue them on. Shire, I believe that we're able to give others the opportunity to either raise their hand or turn off their mic or turn on their mic and come back into the discussion. Because even as we were speaking in 5 minutes, we had to stop and pop back into here. If we could have others pop in and say where they were in their conversation or something that you might have noticed in your reflection, I'll definitely bring in something from our group. It would be really wonderful because this is where the collective comes together and starts to normalize what their experiences have been in being really part of a model minority where the expectations were projected onto you. Gina, I see you've raised your hand, so I'd love to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, sure. Sweta, thank you for all the information, by the way. I mean, it's so relevant and so so meaningful. Um,
Yeah,
so so we had a really small group. I think it was just, two or three of us. And
yeah,
something that we discussed is I think it's very common among a lot of immigrant groups and families and communities, and there's almost like a sense of guilt, that you tend to feel about well, my parents, they struggled and they fought and they clawed, their way to get to where they are. And like now I'm blessed with all this opportunity and, I'm in this really privileged position. So, I can't waste it, right? Like I got to take advantage of everything I'm given. And then sometimes, when you feel like you fall short or, there's, things that don't pan out, it's just this like tremendous sense of guilt and that really has lasting effects. So that's something that we discussed in our group.
absolutely. Thank you. I mean, the idea of guilt is something that's come across in all of the lunch and learns that we've had so far. There's so much guilt in the community for wanting to do something different than what you came from and understanding that there was a lot of intentionality and struggle by those who came here before us and awareness that that was really for an opportunity for those who would come after to have. And so, how do you allow yourself to still be a part of a really rich and beautiful culture that does believe in a collective model, but also allow yourself to separate and navigate the challenges from where you are today rather than from where they were already kind of imposed and projected upon you early on? And there's really a huge difference between what it may have looked like to immigrate here and what it looks like to be born here and navigate a system that you're really born into already. And so I think it's important for us to understand that when the model minority myth is projected onto you and assumed to be a part of you, it's something that you unconsciously also take with you, and that there's guilt trying to separate from it. I think, Gina, is what you're bringing in. Is there anyone else who wants to bring in anything that came up in their small group? But if you don't want to come off your mic, you're more than welcome to type it into the chat box. We had some really rich discussions in ours, and I'll just give everyone a moment to see if there was anything else in their group before I bring up what was in ours. Not seeing anything there. So I will, please pop in if you need to as I'm speaking. Just let us know and raise your hand. So in our group, it was a really wonderful discussion, even talking about the name of our lunch and learn today, good Asian versus bad Asian, and asking, do we even have to name ourselves either or? Is there a possibility just to remove any title at all and allow us to be who we are as people, as individuals, and separate completely from a label? And if that becomes possible, what are we allowing for ourselves when we take the name away? And when we just are allowed to just be Asian, even if you need to be that in that moment? Can I be a person in the world? Can I just be a human being standing next to another human being and not have to have you decide who I am based on what you see and how I look? The other curiosity in the conversation we were having is, why is it assumed that if I'm part of a certain community, then I'm also going to be available as a recipe book to you? One of the curiosities became, if somebody wants to make dumplings, why are they asking me to make dumplings? Why aren't they going on the internet and seeking a recipe for one? If I want to make a bowl of pasta, I'm not going to seek out an Italian member of the community and ask them, how do I make pasta? I'm going to go learn how to make a bowl of pasta. And something that immediately made me think of is that model minority. When you become part of a community, that it is assumed that you are not only going to be passive and quiet, but you are also going to be at service for others. It's also assumed that you are going to stop what you're doing and navigate someone else learning to make dumplings and become their teacher, even if it's not anywhere near your professional role. And something I added at the end of that is, why is it assumed that this person actually can cook dumplings, even if that's something made in their native community? And so we make assumptions and they're projected onto us. And then you're really put in a position to have to decide, am I going to subscribe to that good Asian? And am I going to make myself available? Am I going to passively respond by really quieting my own voice and navigating the voice they need to hear from me? Or am I in that moment going to say, it's not my job to professionally cook, nor is it my job to professionally teach? And so therefore, I'm going to give you the name of the item. I'm going to happily let you know. You can find it on the internet. But my work past that isn't really to support much in there. And how can I continue to use my voice to set my own boundaries and limitations when it's not something that was really taught to me early on? And so this is really understanding that we are bringing in what we were told about ourselves and why we were told we were able to succeed in this society, and trying to create in newer parts of yourself that have boundaries, that have their own voice, that have their own expectation of yourself and others, and really create a language for yourself that works for you and feels true to who you are today. We're going to jump into navigating our cultural identity and mental health, because so much of what we're talking about is really talking about the impact on our mental health when you're told early on who you're expected to be and the box that you're expected to remain in. Healing always starts with awareness. I often say you do, and we've heard this before, and I am not the first to say it. I'm the first for myself to keep reusing it in my family. But we do not know who we are if we do not know where we came from. For me to understand my current behaviors, I have to understand what was modeled for me and how I started to automatically do things that were told to me, or even just behaviors in front of me that I saw my caregivers presenting with. And then I really have to start with the awareness that I started to internalize those early on. And I have to decide how much of that do I want to keep with me now. We get to reclaim our narrative by challenging these myths when they arise, internally and externally. So, internally, what does that sound like? I'm put in a position to have to consider how I'm going to respond to something. And I'm asking myself, is this response coming from Swetha, who I am today, or is this coming from the expectations that were projected onto me that I have started to just repeat without thought over and over again? And externally, am I being praised for being easy to work with, for being able to stretch myself over and over again to become available to others? And am I so accustomed to that praise feeling good that the idea of saying no means that I also have to navigate grieving the loss of what it means to not be as easy for others? And how is that going to personally feel as I'm navigating those changes? This starts to look like us having conversations like we are today. That AAPI 5-minute breakout group that we did today is such a small slice of the pie on something we could be doing on such a large level that we could be doing over and over again. So if we're having conversations within the AAPI community that discuss and acknowledge the AAPI experiences and the impact of the model minority myth on the sense of self and the expectations of yourself, you're really going to start to hear yourself and how it started to really take a thread through all of the experiences that you've had, both personally and professionally. And then self-compassion. It means giving ourselves permission to be human. And this came up in our small group. Good Asian, bad Asian, can I just be human? Self-compassion means giving ourselves permission to be human, not perfect. You can honor your heritage and you can still honor your boundaries. In the therapy world, we are strong believers in the both end. We do not slice anything into either or. Because when you feel like you have to choose one or the other, you lose a part of yourself. So can both be true? Is it possible that I want to remain connected to the heritage that I came from, the culture that I'm a part of, and that the collective will always be a value of mine? But I have recognized that I have boundaries, that I have limitations within myself that don't always align with what the collective is asking me to do. And so, can I allow myself to still see myself as part of the collective, even if today I said I'm going to sit this one out? It's really sitting with that and allowing yourself to even tolerate the guilt that might come up. Guilt is a big thing that came up. Even Gina brought it in today. And we welcome guilt. It's something that we can really navigate within ourselves if we make it safe to talk about it. And lastly, seeking support through therapy, community, or even spiritual practice is a courageous act for you to take on. I use the word therapy often, and I know that therapy does not mean for each person coming into a room like mine and needing to share or needing to navigate and look through the past to be able to go into the future. But it does mean finding places that you are still enough to allow yourself to be seen and heard. So when I use that word, I want you to think, what is my therapy? Where do I go that I really believe I can be seen and heard? Seen and heard means I'm just joining you in where you are. I'm not looking to change it. I'm not looking to challenge it. I'm looking to just meet you in the space that you're in. And if I can even identify with it, I may share that with you. If I can't, I may allow for that moment to just listen. When you do that, you're saying, I matter too. What I need is important, and what I need needs to take up space. Allowing yourself to seek support can also create a domino effect of normalizing support to others in the community. The more that I have shared with others as a therapist myself, that I have gone to therapy, that I have sought out support services when I've needed it, that I'm open to being able to seek those same things out for my children if there's something that I don't know how to navigate, has made it safer for those in my personal and professional life to ask me for resources when they need it. And so it's really, really important that we create more safe community members who can be those for others and who can really be someone that someone else can say, hey, I'm really noticing this is occurring. Where do I go to address this? Who would I speak to? Where do I even start? We really want to allow for an openness in this conversation. I was at a health fair with many physicians a few months ago at a local Indian temple, and one of the doctors came up to me and said, most of my clients who are coming in these days are dealing with depression and anxiety. She was a PCP, but they will not allow themselves to call it depression and anxiety. So they come to me over and over again, assuming it's something medical, because they're not able to navigate what it means to be something in the mental health world. We really want to encourage others to know there's so much opportunity for quality of life if we're able to acknowledge what is going on. We're going to jump into some resources for support. And these resources are ones that we know are specifically for our AAPI communities. Whether you're looking for therapists who are able to get it, and get it just might mean cultural competency. I need you to be able to meet me where I am. Tools to better understand your own mental health, or even just hotlines that are there for crisis. And those are all places to start. One of the biggest questions I get as an AAPI provider is that there's just not enough AAPI providers out there. So how do I find one? I want to remind you, while it could be really important to be able to meet with somebody who's able to be in the room with you and maybe even looks like you, or you might have a sense, experience things similar to you, there's also a lot of therapists out there who are leaning into cultural competency, who are leaning into awareness that they don't know what they don't know. And it's not your job to become their teacher, but just allowing yourself to trust that there are many providers out there who also may not be part of our API community, but care to serve our community, allows you to know there's so many more resources out there than it might feel like there are. I'm going to pause here and just thank everyone for joining the conversation today. My hope is that you're leaving with more clarity, validation, and some tools to challenge the myth that you heard about and that you will continue to probably notice in our community, both within you and around you. And I'm just curious if we have any questions before we wrap up today.
I just want to thank you for this presentation workshop.
Of course.
I was just curious, is there a way that I can access it if I missed if I came in late?
Absolutely. This is actually a recorded presentation. So after the presentation, they typically do send it back out to all the participants today. And I believe AAPI also keeps access to it on their website. But I'm sure Gina and Shira can better answer where it will live on their website. But there is always access to it in the future.
Great. Thank you so much. Thanks, everybody.
Of course. Of course. I'm just kind of checking out our chat box as well. Just noticing some things that people said earlier that I just think are so important. Practicing self-care in secret from my family because they would often take offense to meditation or yoga or therapy. What's wrong with you if I did everything right? And so even wanting to allow yourself to take care of yourself becomes something that you received a critical response to. And then it becomes something that you feel like you have to hide in yourself. That is something that I really think we have to understand the messaging that reinforces. And that's one example of so many that I'm sure are out there. I'm sure everyone on here can probably share something here that they've heard. I'm seeing someone unmute. Did you want to come in and say something? Maybe not. Okay. So I'm going to take a moment then just to say thank you so much again to everyone for being here. It's not easy to pause much of what we're doing these days. I think we can all acknowledge that we're feeling like our cups are fairly full. But to pause and take this space is something that I hope creates more capacity for you and awareness, and at the least allows you to feel a sense of being seen and held over space. Gina, are you seeing anyone else who's wanting to come in? I just want to make sure I'm not missing anything.
Yeah, Alex, do you have your hand up?
Yes, yes. So can you please share what it looks like on the other side? Meaning like a vital, healthy, integrated,
Oh, that's a beautiful
transformed.
question, Alex.
And then I have one more.
Yeah.
Can you also share? It seems no matter how much I continue to on my own journey, going to my own story, healing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when I'm in the moment, when I'm at the boss level with family, it's still so hard to come back to myself in the moment. So can you answer those two questions, please? Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. The belief, I mean, first I want to say back what your questions were. So what does it look like to be able to get to a place where we feel like we're on the other side? And the other side might look like I've been able to integrate the work that I've done and start to really feel a change within myself and feel that start to really be a part of what my life feels like every day. We believe that we're always evolving, that what we are experiencing is always continuing to change and it's fluid with us. However, we are also able to rewire and restructure those earlier parts of ourselves through corrective experiences. So, what does that look like? The more that I am able to give myself opportunity to hear myself, to navigate the voice that I have now, to really lay firm in it and understand who it is, I am less likely to move away from that baseline part of myself. It also means that when I go into spaces like my family of origin, which we expect as therapists for you to regress in, then I am aware that I'm moving back into that space and I need to know what I need to do to guardrail when I'm there so that I don't move so far away from the baseline that I've created for myself. And a lot of times that looks like creating different opportunities in the therapeutic world. There's something that's called parts work. We use parts work to really understand whose voice is navigating in this moment. Was that me? Was that my father? Was that my mother? Was that my sister? Was that a grandparent? Or was that really me in that moment that chose to make the decision that I did? And if it was not, I'll know that in that moment, my father led. In that moment, my mother led, and I'll understand for myself what allowed for it to occur, what happened in that moment that the crack opened. And I'll use the resources that I have to really be gentle with myself and understand how I got to where I did in that moment. But through rewiring, which we understand can occur, there's so much study now on the fact that we can rewire in our brain. We can really allow ourselves to create a completely different experience around something that looks exactly the same as it did. So if you walk into your childhood home and you found yourself reacting one way, most likely there's something that you were not able to resolve. If you find yourself creating resolve in it, your experience of it is no longer going to be activating, and that's our goal for you. And that is absolutely possible, but it really takes so much work. I remind a lot of my clients, you lived with one way of thinking for 20, 30, 40 years. It's not going to be an overnight change. And we encourage you to be gentle with yourself and compassionate with yourself along the change process. But it also means surrounding yourself with peers who are having the conversations that you are. Really speaking to people who are saying, I also desire that change. And this is what it feels like for me because it's getting reinforced in your personal life over and over again. Alex, that was a wonderful question. And I think the question was a curiosity about hope. I always say hope is at the baseline of the work that I do. I couldn't do it if I didn't believe in it. And so having hope that there's a real possibility to rewire and restructure is really what we're starting with, even when you showed up today. So thank you so much for that question.
So beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you,
Yeah.
everybody.
Thank you again. We're just about shy of 1 o'clock. So I want to really respect everyone's time. And again, thank you so much for being here with us today. I really hope that you were able to show up and get what you were looking for. And if not, maybe even a bit more. And please know that we're going to continue to be a resource in the community for everyone.